Let's talk about the one big beautiful bill. So I know at the moment there's a debate of whether the House is going to pass it or not. Here's some breaking news. Whether it happens before July 4th or after July 4th, the House is going to pass the Senate version of the one big beautiful bill, this legislation that funds all of Donald Trump's major priorities. And that is just the reality. If it doesn't happen, I'll come back on and make a video about how the Republican Party stood up to Donald Trump, and it'll be the first time that I'll make a video about how the Republican Party stood on principle and stood against Donald Trump, because it's just not going to happen. But I think that the debate misses over, is it going to pass? Do they have the votes? Do they not? Kind of misses the point. So, the point, let me say right off, the point is this. This bill is the death knell of the Mitt Romney, Paul Ryan, John McCain, Barry Goldwater Republican Party. The idea of what a Republican now believes, what a conservative now believes in the MAGA era is fundamentally different, and I think, than it was 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. And I think that is absolutely encapsulated in the one big beautiful bill. Let me explain. So the bill does lots of things. The biggest thing that the bill does is it extends Donald Trump's tax cuts that he put in place in 2017. Now, those tax cuts obviously mean that there's less money coming into the U.S. coffers, right? And therefore, you're going to have to cut spending. But we're not really cutting spending. Let me read one thing from the New York Times about this bill, at least the version that passed the Senate. The legislation that Republicans passed through the Senate stands apart in its harm to the budget, analysts say. Not only did an initial analysis show it adding at least $3.3 trillion with a T, to the nation's debt over the next 10 years, making it among the most expensive bills in a generation, but it would also reduce the amount of tax revenue the country collects for decades. Such a shortfall could begin a seismic shift in the nation's fiscal trajectory and raise the risk of a debt crisis. That's the bill that the House, like I said, at some point in the very near future is going to pass and Donald Trump is going to sign into law. A $3.3 trillion addition to the nation's debt, which is already in the tens of trillions of dollars. Now, this is not your father's Republican Party, and this is proof of it, right? I remember when I got into politics, John McCain ran two presidential campaigns, 2000 and 2008, expressly on the idea that the debt and deficit had gotten out of control. And it was much smaller back then. The debt and deficit had gotten out of control. We were burdening future generations. This was incredibly dangerous, and we needed to address it. Paul Ryan got picked as Mitt Romney's VP in 2012 because he was a fiscal hawk, because he was focused on the debt and the deficit. Let me read you something from the speech Romney gave introducing Ryan as his VP nominee. This is Romney. With energy and vision, Paul Ryan has become an intellectual leader of the Republican Party. He understands the fiscal challenges facing America, our exploding deficits and crushing debt, and the fiscal catastrophe that awaits us if we don't change course. That was in 2012, okay? And now, look where we are. We are in a place where a Republican-controlled White House, a Republican-controlled Senate, and a Republican-controlled House are about to pass legislation that is going to add more than $3 trillion to the debt. This was once the core principle of the Republican Party. This was at the center of it, fiscal conservatism. Out the window. And I'm going to explain to you why it all happened in a sec. But before I get to that, I want to get to this, which is I want you to become a subscriber to what I'm building here on this channel. We are on the verge of 100,000 subscribers to this channel, which makes me so, so happy. I hope that you consider joining us today. I am an independent news creator. I'm independent of big corporate media companies making settlements with Donald Trump. I'm also independent of the two parties. I'm going to call it how I see it, always without fear or favor. Okay, so how did we get here? Well, I'm not the guy who wants to lay everything at the feet of Donald Trump. But both parties have been kicking the can down the road on debt and deficit issues for a while now. But I will say, since Trump became a figure in the Republican Party, which is about a decade ago, it's been very clear that the whole idea of fiscal conservatism, of ending our debt problems, were not going to be a priority for Republicans anymore. So in March 2016, so Trump was on the verge of becoming the Republican nominee. In March 2016, he did an interview with Bob Woodward of the Washington Post. And they talked about debt and deficit. Let me just go through this back and forth. Here's Trump. We've got to get rid of the $19 trillion in debt. Woodward. How long would that take? Trump. I think I could do it fairly quickly because of the fact the numbers. Woodward interrupts and says, what's fairly quickly? Well, I would say over a period of 8 years, Trump responds. Again, that was never going to happen. It was totally flippant. The Washington Post fact checker at the time wrote this. Of all the wildly impossible assertions made by Donald Trump, the notion that he could eliminate the nation's $19 trillion in debt in just 8 years ranks near the top. Yes, it does. Because Donald Trump never really cared about debt and deficit. You want to know why? Because voters don't vote on it. Donald Trump is focused on things that voters vote on. Voters, no matter how much you explain that, though, when we are spending way more than we are bringing in, and our debt is in hock to China and other foreign countries who own our debt, people don't care. They're just not focused on it, even though they either don't understand it or they don't care about it. And Trump grasped that. So in his first term, Donald Trump raised, you ready for this? Donald Trump raised the national debt by $8 trillion. $8 trillion. It was the third biggest increase relative to the size of the economy ever by a president, with the only other two being George W. Bush, who was prosecuting the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and Abraham Lincoln, who was prosecuting the Civil War. So the third biggest increase ever, $8 trillion. And for those people who say, Chris, well, that was during COVID. No. Yes, COVID mattered, but Trump had already made clear that busting deficit and debt issues did not matter to him. Here is ProPublica. I really like this, a nonpartisan independent site, journalism site. They wrote this about Trump and the debt. The combination of Trump's 2017 tax cut and the lack of any serious spending restraint helped both the debt and deficit soar. So when the once-in-a-lifetime viral disaster, COVID-19, slammed our country and we threw more than $3 trillion into COVID-19 related stimulus, there was no longer any margin for error. This speaks to the fact that Donald Trump has never been animated or cared about debt and deficit stuff. He just hasn't. It's never been something that he thought mattered because it didn't matter to voters. And what is remarkable, again, just to reiterate, not 100 years ago did Republicans put debt and deficit and reducing both at the center of their politics. 15 years ago they did. 2000, 2008, 2012, all these nominees were picked expressly because, at least in part, they said we are spending like crazy. We need to get this under control. This is unsustainable, et cetera, et cetera. And yet, now in 2025, Republicans at some point in the next few days probably are going to pass something that is going to increase the national debt by more than $3 trillion. They know this. They are doing it because either they never believed in debt and deficit spending in the first place. Some of them, that's true. And then for the other ones, they're afraid of Donald Trump. The party has changed. The base of the party does not care about this. The elites in the party might. The base of the party does not care. They will not punish these voters, these elected officials for voting for something that adds $3 trillion to the debt. And they probably will punish them for voting against something that Donald Trump wants. And that's where we are today. This is a remake of the Republican Party, a remake of what conservative means. It no longer means we're going to reduce the size of government. We're going to reduce spending. No, it doesn't. It means whatever Donald Trump says it means. And that is just the reality of this current moment. The one big beautiful bill should be understood as the official death date of fiscal conservatism as a defining principle of the Republican Party. It simply no longer is. As I said, I hope you subscribe to this channel. We are almost to 100,000. Hope to get there very soon. I hope you like and comment on this video. I think it's a really, really important subject. It also helps my videos get out to people who aren't already subscribers. And I hope you tell a friend or two at that July 4th barbecue, hey, this guy Chris Cillizza, he's an independent. He's making content that I think you'd enjoy. So I hope you check it out, spread the word, and be well.